And it reminded me of something that I said in the Pisces solar eclipse that just happened, and then thinking about how looking at the simulation of the shadow of the moon going across parts of the earth, and for some reason it instantly made me think of Lilith. Like, I was like, wow, look at Lilith go, she's sweeping across the earth, because it's a dark aspect that is being projected by the moon, which would be the enema personification, which is what Lilith is. In Carl Jung's archetypes, he talks about the enema and the animus. The enema is essentially the female archetype that is supposed to represent his shadow projection. In mythology, that was associated, well, with religious text, that's referenced with Lilith, which is Adam, from Adam and Eve's first wife, that then turned into a demon and started killing children. Or that her children became spawn and then, took over the world. And in mythology, the siren, which is that in Greek mythology, is that woman-like bird thing that would sing and hypnotize men and then usually come up and kill them in some kind. And it does have some similarities to the succubus as well, depending on what mythology you look at. And the succubus is supposed to be that temptress, that sinful person that's supposed to be a projection of the devil, that is supposed to then possess the man after trying to make him succumb to her sexual desires. So, that being said, I was thinking along the lines of that, and one of the things I did say in that video was that right now the Earth is going through some purging because of the whole Pluto thing going on, and the Pluto thing directly having effects with volcanoes as well as earthquakes and natural disasters, because it's in Capricorn. Has to do with the structure and stability. And then I thought also more of the mythology concept. So Saturn is associated with karma. Lilith is also not an extension of Saturn, but more of like if Saturn were the devil, like they say, Satan, then obviously Lilith is one of his demons. So one of his workers that goes out and unleashes karma on somebody else. But she only comes after those who succumb to her. And succumbing to her means that you would have committed sin through your moon, probably in your previous life. And that's how the moon is associated with the soul, because you're inheriting your original sin. That's the whole concept from the Bible. Why your moon sign is supposed to be your emotional complexities as well as your soul and your intuition, because that's the residual and the remnants that carries with you from whatever previous existence or consciousness you may have had, theoretically. So, that being said, when I was thinking of Saturn is ruled by Aquarius, obviously has something to do with trauma, and Capricorn. So the duality of that is Capricorn will reward you essentially Saturn will reward you or give you stability if you do everything appropriately. And that's if you become the Capricorn manifestation of Saturn. If you come to sin or you stray away, which Aquarius would be straying away from the social norms because it's eccentric, antisocial, and tends to be the sign that has narcissistic personality disorder and or has psychopathy, which would be antisocial personality disorder. It's something that wouldn't act normal. So when you stray away from what the establishment of what you do, tradition of what you do, God what you do, which Saturn was the Latin Church back in the early times of Christianity. And that's when it was in the Old Testament days, and theoretically the closest it possibly could ever get to Islam, which, by the way, isn't now. But, so, what I'm getting at is that if you do stray away, then Lilith will come after you. And so, if Capricorn is supposed to be the higher duality of Saturn, and it continues to have this square with Lilith, so what that does is it does two things. It's rewarding and stabilizing during this mutable year's time the people that have been doing things right, the people that do not have past karma and blood on their hands. Yes, it's difficult for anybody, especially with the histories of our cultures, to say that they do not have blood on their hands. And also another factor is that it's absolutely you have no ability to even fathom essentially who you were or what you did in said past life. Therefore, you cannot even attribute exactly what's going on with you now as to find out what you did then. And even if you could, there's no way to repent sins of a previous life. And even so, there is no such thing as repenting things, because that is supposed to be a metaphor for learning your lesson. It's not supposed to be saying sorry to some imaginary entity, or an entity of any kind if he even does exist. He cannot take back what you've done. You cannot undo the trauma. You cannot undo the damage that is done. Saying sorry to a broken plate on the floor does not make the plate go back together. It doesn't happen like that. Things have been tied and severed, and it's over. The damage is done, and the butterfly effect will continue to go on, and you will have to pay for it. So, that being said, the only way I could even imagine that somebody would be able to attribute the certain things that happen during these eclipses as being karmatic, because essentially, in a way, it is with where you are, who your ancestors were in this life. So, as much as we have our own individual concepts of karma and sin that we have to deal with in our own personal microcosmic existence, there is a collective sin, or a geographical sin in a way, to where, especially with this eclipse that happened right now, it went through parts of Indonesia, and then the Sumatra Islands, and then the Samoa Islands, and then parts into Hawaii, and the limited amounts of effects that would have on the places north and south is still going to be Japan and Russia and Australia. And I find it very interesting, as I was making that and we were going almost closely into the eclipse, that there was a massive earthquake over in the Samoan Islands. So what I'm saying is, when there's an eclipse, especially a solar eclipse that has a specific direction and length that it goes, and it puts that shadow across the earth, you have to look exactly where that is going. And it even gives you this radiating black, glowing, I guess, barrier or whatever, or coordinates that you could see where it's going to manifest, but in a lesser degree. Look back at the history of that geographical area and see what atrocities had been had to them, to whoever dwelled there, or what atrocities were committed by the people who dwelled in that area, regardless if it's directly you or not. Because God is not always fair, life is definitely not always fair, but God is just, and if you're going to go with that, but if you also know in nature, if you're more of the evolutionist or scientist buff or whatever, or atheist, that there is no fairness in the wildlife, that nature is brutal, and that there is no sympathy or mercy for somebody who just happens to be at the wrong place, wrong time. So if a particular country or collective people, race, religion, whatever, were guilty of doing some sort of atrocity, they would likely be paying for it. And then somebody would say, well, how can you associate karma and sin and going to hell and paying for it after, essentially, because the way it works is you commit sin, you're guilty, when you die, you have to face your consequences. So how can that possibly happen within life itself if there's no separation between the sinful life and the purgatory and karma that they would have to face? So this is where we kind of stretch the metaphor a little bit to more of a physiological interpretation. Pluto takes 249 years to go through all the signs. Pluto, essentially similar to Saturn's, the keeper of time, it is the keeper of humanity, okay? So, yes, it was discovered by us, and obviously astrology was developed by man in general anyway, but it's Pluto that essentially holds the karma and the discipline or just deserves for humanity. So, funny enough, if you look back to some ancient civilizations, especially throughout like different wars and invasions, and just different cycles of empires falling and creating and taking over or whatever, they go in specific. You'll start to notice that at least some of them are consistent with a certain mathematical pattern. Well, the United States of America is at 222 years into their 249 Pluto return. So, that is also why there's going to be lots of things going on with America. And since America has actually stuck its claws into every facet of the global economy, as well as just every other country's government and policies, when America falls, essentially it's going to cause all kinds of repercussions everywhere. And not only that, every other demographic, nation, country, culture is already going through their own cycles, and depending on which ones you're referencing, could depend on which ones are actually closer to their return or if they've already gone through it. So not only do we have different kinds of generational influences, which are with the outer planets beyond, not just including Pluto, then we have the inner planets that are the triggers that are directly affected by acts and conscious intent of humanity. And then Pluto and Saturn are essentially the ones that then establish what is okay, what is karmatically incorrect.